What's up guys, Houndish here, and today I wanted to talk about Destiny 2 and how Bungie and the community interact. I'm going to outline some of Destiny's problems and some things which I expect to see going forward, but I wanted to talk about how the community have and will change Destiny 2 for the better in the future. Now, I understand that some people are really angry about the state of Destiny 2, and it's something that I completely respect. It's a point of view which I share in most cases as well. So I just want to point out that this isn't a let's tolerate whatever Bungie throw at us video. The way Bungie behave is important to this conversation, but the purpose of this video is to highlight how we have influenced the changes in Destiny 2 so far, and how right now at this point in time, it's incredibly important for us to continue to do that in the right way. I also understand that for some people, there would be the argument that Bungie don't in fact listen to us. And I think in certain cases, it's taken Bungie way too long to respond to things, and that certainly gives that impression. Unfortunately, in too many cases, we've essentially had to go kicking and screaming to get Bungie to listen to us, or at least to, respond in the appropriate way. And although that isn't the ideal way to go about things, it does prove that we can force Bungie's hand. So, of course, Destiny 2 has its problems, endgame, loot, whichever way you want to spin those issues. Bungie's approach and lack of response in many cases has kind of been seen as them taking advantage of the community. Do I genuinely think that Destiny players have been taken advantage of? Well, I think that Destiny 2 at base is okay in terms of value. What Bungie and Activision have capitalized on is our desire for shiny loot, be it useful or not, and many of these items are behind Eververse. Having Eververse itself is much less of a problem when you don't lock a vast array of what were previously endgame rewards behind it. I think, to be frank, that we have been taken advantage of by the corporation. As for whether the corporate leadership will change direction on that, we'll honestly have to see, but I think Bungie, you have to do something about it to protect the community and your integrity. There is a balance that can be struck here, and making Eververse right at this point in time would be a very wise decision. I think very poor decisions have been made when it comes to Eververse and how that model affects Destiny 2's endgame, loot, and progression. However, I know that there are many people at Bungie who work their asses off to create awesome things. For me, it's the leadership and the higher-ups of Bungie and Activision who need to adjust the approach here for the better of the game, its reputation, and its vibrant community. And the reason that we've gone over Eververse once again in this fashion is that, to a lot of people, I think it's what is creating this kind of barrier between Bungie and the community. It's one of those elements where people do truly feel kind of exploited, and on top of the effects that it has on the game and everything like that, all of the technicalities behind it, it creates more hostility between us and the developer, and that's why it needs to be addressed in the appropriate fashion. So like I said before, there's a lot of frustration in the community, anger at Bungie, disappointment, conflict inside of the community itself, but I wanted to point out how we can play a positive role in the future of this game. And once again, this isn't from the perspective of, being a Bungie apologist or, defending the fact that they'll do exactly what we want them to, because, like I've said, often they don't listen, they don't react quickly enough, and it's not all about what you do and how quickly you do it, it's more about recognizing the issues. But to demonstrate how we can have an influence, even though sometimes we have to exert way too much energy to do it, I want to look at Destiny 2's, recent history and the interaction between the community and Bungie. But Curse of Osiris and the December updates. Curse of Osiris has been bashed pretty hard for its lack of innovation and its poor loot systems, plus the continued and amped up implementation of Eververse. Although for players still in the game, the new content and the introduction of new systems has been very much welcomed. The conversation really began before the DLC though. That laughable stream where we saw the new public event on Mercury, it came at a time where we'd had weeks of negative feedback which had begun spiraling into a general outrage from the community. Then of course we had the immortalized 2 tokens and a blue moment, and it was just cringeworthy, but from the pain of that moment, it's like we all reached a realization, holy crap, this is actually happening. The thing is, Bungie realized it too. The final stream was cancelled, we had assurances that we would hear about meaningful endgame updates for December. The outrage from the community and the embarrassment actually forced Bungie into this motion where they knew they had to talk updates and they had to be candid about the game. We had tweets from Luke Smith, the following week we had the State of Destiny 2 article, we learned about Masterworks and many other features that were being added, and while Bungie had obviously been working on these already, we created so much noise that we made Bungie make sure that they answered appropriately. And it's worth remembering the gravity of this at the time. We were all very glad to hear about these changes. We made Bungie do something relatively remarkable in opening up to the criticism. There are other instances when heroic strikes and prestige content was locked behind DLC. We contributed to that conversation. Bungie reacted. When XP throttling was still active, sure, it took a while at the time, but we helped to ensure that the issue was addressed. Since the dawning, we've had small responses from Bungie recognizing that we don't like the systems there. They've assured us that they will address Eververse. Now that isn't Bungie taking action, of course, but we have had the holidays, so the timing isn't very good. We made Bungie make a promise though. That's the important thing. The key thing I want to make clear is that we do have an influence over the game. We're not always going to get exactly what we want, and often it's going to take too long, which Bungie still need to improve on, much like they did in December. So please continue to make your feedback heard, because right now is the time to do it. We've had the big holiday break. Bungie have said they will be coming back in full force, so we have to hold them to it and continue to provide them with our thoughts and issues with the game. So here are my hopes for the new year. Most of these are general requests as opposed to being very specific changes. Also, I'm not listing these things and saying that Bungie have failed or won't do them. These are my expectations and those which I see mirrored in the community. And I may as well direct this directly to Bungie, so listen up. Many people want you to do something to drastically improve Eververse. You promised that you would address it, and I think people will appreciate it if you show that you care. This is not only my personal belief, but it's also one that I see represented by a vast number of people in this community. You cannot afford to skirt around the Eververse issue. You've ensured us that we will see improvements in January. I'd love it if you could please follow a similar cadence as to what we saw in December. I and many others understand that things take time, but again, prove that you care, put the resources into making those updates in a timely and meaningful fashion. And also continue the regular commentary and conversation which you demonstrated back in December. I'm not a developer and I can't claim to understand all of the processes here, but I think if possible you should be willing to take more risks from time to time across the board with things like sandbox balance and new systems. Seeing a monthly update, even with very small additions or changes, would help Destiny to feel more like a live game. For example, one thing which hasn't been looked at or addressed really whatsoever are things like sandbox balance inside of PvP. If you look at weapon usage for Trials of the Nine or Crucible in general, we see the same weapons, origin story, Uriel's Gift, Last Hope, Mida Multitool. Those things have been dominant since Destiny 2 launched, and basically nothing has changed. On top of the fact that currently there is no PvP progression system, PvP has been allowed to just go completely stale, and this is something that you promised wouldn't be an issue inside of Destiny 2 because you have all of this control over, weapons. We don't have random rolls, and I think sometimes even when the stats suggest things are fairly balanced, you need to just mix things up a little bit, have a little bit of fun, buff some of the things that aren't used too much. And that's just one example of how the things you said going into Destiny 2 and the design philosophies you've employed don't correlate to what we're seeing now. We're not seeing any changes. Obviously, I recognize that now we're going into a new year. Bungie do have things planned. And of course, primarily right now, we need the conversation about meaningful changes that will be happening early this year. We need Bungie to follow up on the promises they've made about Eververse and continued additions to the game. And Bungie, I think with the right efforts, you can continue to right the ship and we can look to a more positive future. It's an opportunity that you seized because you had to in November and December. You've made more assurances for the new year, and I can assure you of one thing, and that is that the community will hold you to this. We want to see you on top of the game, quite literally. So those are my thoughts for Bungie, guys. I hope that you realize the impact that you have, and I hope that you know that I'm always rooting for what's best for Destiny and the community as well. That's why I make these videos. I have a platform where I can contribute and I can try and take what you guys are saying and help to amplify it. I understand if you're angry, you've heard me hold Bungie to it as well. Just don't forget that your voice is important, especially right now at this time. We have the opportunity to help mold the future of Destiny. And hopefully going forward, we won't have to do it with quite as much kicking and screaming, although that isn't our fault. I completely understand it. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section, guys. Whatever your opinion on this video, a rating would be very much appreciated. If you find yourself agreeing and you'd like to see more Destiny 2 content and conversation going forward, feel free to hit that subscribe button. But for now, I hope you guys have an awesome day.